Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, bark like a dog for me.
Where's the goodies?
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Hello. I'd like to introduce you to my mother.
Isn't she pretty? She's got a real heft to her.
One, you're the real conductor? You've just been trying to get back to the engine?
Yeah, it's a little weird, huh?
This is Douglas Viviani. Everything Old is New Again. Sans David Cohen. That may have been a spoiler. We'll investigate that in a moment. Welcome to Everything Old is New Again. We have a terrific guest this week that stands behind and has created what you just heard. We'll introduce that in a minute, but basically what we want to do here is introduce my other co-host this week. As you've heard, sometimes in the past when we've done shows like this, my kids have taken David Cohen's place. Angelica Viviani, 12 years old. You'll see why she's here in a moment, and it will really add to the spice of this show. Angelica, say hello.
Hello.
And Leo Viviani, 9 years old, another fan of this show, which we're going to introduce you to in a moment. Leo, say hello just so we know your voice.
Hi.
There we go. Now, I'll tell you what, our special guest this week is a creator of the 4-season hit TV show which debuted on Cartoon Network and then moved to HBO Max, Infinity Train. A show that is unique to me in that it's an animated show, but it speaks to us all, adults and children, I think. We'll investigate that. It's kind of mysterious, and you solve some mysteries. It's fun, of course. It's creative, which I think you can tell from what I'm describing here, and it throws out the possibility that the viewer, if you're paying attention and are involved, can actually learn a life lesson or two from Infinity Train. Welcome to Everything Old is New Again, Owen Dennis.
Hi.
Short and sweet, which is good. We want to get as much out of you as we can in the short time we have this week. Here's the thing. As speaking of short and sweet, Hollywood always asks you to do sort of an elevator pitch when you introduce a show. And I'm wondering if you could do that just for us. And this is such a unique show. It might be difficult, but just give us a smidge of an elevator pitch to introduce those who have not heard and seen, I should say, Infinity Train yet. What's the show about?
The show is about a girl who gets sort of sucked onto this interdimensional train, and in each train car is a different universe, and she wakes up on this train with a number on her hand, and she has to figure out, like, well, what's up with this number on my hand. And that's like the first season, and the show is actually sort of turns into an anthology after that. So every season is a new main character with new problems and new issues for each season.
And it's something that really brings to light the idea of the change to me of animated entertainment from Bugs Bunny, let's say, when I was a kid, to now, because it, like you say, it has an arc, it has a story, and it does, I think, present very interesting ideas. Angelica, you may have a question right off the bat for Mr. Dennis. Go ahead.
Hi, so I had a question on how did you come up with the idea of Infinity Train, and, like, was there anything in particular that inspired you to create the show?
So originally, when I first thought of the show, I thought of it when I woke up on an airplane. I was flying back and forth. So on an ocean flight back, I woke up over the ocean, and it's this big, super quiet part of the ocean where everybody was sort of sleeping or like watching TVs or whatever. And I woke up and I looked around and I saw that everybody was like staring into these TVs, and I was like, wow. I was like momentarily kind of confused and like, ah. And so I sort of wanted to go with that idea of that moment of like I'm waking up in a place that I don't fully understand. When I looked around, I saw these people like staring into TVs and like totally zoned out, and it was really weird just for that moment. So I wanted to do something that was sort of playing off of that idea. Then I decided, like, well, plane isn't really big enough, so I'll make a train. And so went with a train, and that's sort of how the show was conceived. When I first thought of Tulip, who's the main character, I knew what kind of person I wanted to be. So when you're working on a TV show or a movie or anything, it's often best to think about, like, okay, well, this is what the world is. This is what's happening. What sort of character would learn the most from this? And so with Infinity Train, the whole thing is like every single train car is a new experience, and it's different every single time. So the person that would most gain something from that, would have the most to grow and the most they would get out of that, would be someone who is very analytical and is like wants things to be the same and wants it to be one way, things are right or wrong or whatever. And so putting that kind of person to that sort of situation gives them the most room for growth. So that's sort of how I started thinking about Tulip as well, the main character, and figuring out her arc and all that sort of stuff.
So interesting how the product of, I'm not going to say boredom, but just, in that plane looking around, how the creative mind can come up with the genesis of an idea just by, I guess you'd say your mind is clear and you're observing life in front of you, right? And you're able to then kind of tap into the creative part of you, like, well, what is really going on here? And maybe I could explore this,
Yeah, I would say a frustrating amount of ideas happen right when I'm about to go to sleep or right when I wake up, which is very annoying when I'm trying to go to sleep.
Well, for me, it's like you let go of the thought of paying the mortgage, so to speak, or whatever it might be, and you're able to kind of like tap into a little more fun of life, which is what this show also is. And I would ask you, talking about fun when you were growing up, I know you were a fan of Myst, which is a game that I played as a kid. It's sort of lost in the shuffle, I think, now with all of the big games that there are. But it was sort of a point-and-click adventure. You'd look at a screen, and they wouldn't tell you anything, if I remember. You'd have to kind of investigate, point, and you click on this screen and take you somewhere else, and you look for clues and look for, solving a mystery. Obviously, to me, that sounds like somewhat of what happens sometimes in the episodes of Infinity Train, and maybe you could take us there a little bit as to as you were a kid and how Myst sort of created that kind of theory in your mind, or at least this creativity of how to come up with a series like this later on,
Yeah, when Myst came out, it was like one of the first big hit video games on CD-ROM, which was like this big deal at the time, and it was like it had 3D generated images which looked like super realistic, which now you look at and you're like, no, they're not. but at the time they were it was this brand new technology, and it was amazing, and it really wasn't much more than like a very fancy PowerPoint presentation, right? Where it's sort of like it's just a series of images that you click and you get to go to these different sort of rooms and stuff. But I remember my experience with it was like I watched my mom play it, and I tried playing it, and I couldn't really because I couldn't read. There was a lot of reading that was involved with it. But by the time Riven came out, which was the sequel to Myst, I could definitely read. And so I started becoming a little more involved, and I got really into the games, and I started like playing them and trying to. I read all the books. There were like Myst books, and there were like, I just got really into it, and it really pushed me to get into 3D animation, which at the time when I started getting really into 3D animation, it was still a very, very new thing. So that was like the early 2000s, and that was still when like, is it a 3D movie or is it going to be a 2D animated movie, and like that sort of thing was happening, and all that sort of stuff. So I got really into that, and it's sort of, there was a lot of creative discovery and like figuring out, well, how do I make something 3D? How do I do this? How do I do that? And when you're living in like rural Minnesota, it's in 2002 or whatever, that's a pretty difficult hobby to pick up, because there weren't any like, classes or instruction manuals or anything. It was just like whatever. So Myst was this constant process while I was playing it of like discovery, and then trying to make my own versions of Myst, where I would try to make 3D worlds that you could point and click through using PowerPoint like software. I would make those, and it was just this constant process of discovery and mystery, and being like, oh, how do you do that? How does that work? How do these puzzles, like all this sort of stuff? And so that feeling was something that I tried to carry over into the show as well, because it's just something that's so affected my life so strongly that I was just like, it really became a big part of who I am and what I look for in my media.
It's interesting how things, as we talk about and everything old is new again, things that are in our past, whether it be our own individual past or collectively in pop culture, rely upon things of the in the past of yours or in pop culture as a foundation to the creativity of today and to the new things you build today.
Yeah, and I mean, something else even with Infinity Train is that like I was trying to make it feel like it felt when I would pick up a tape from the library when I was a kid. So if you watch it, there's like a film grain on it, and like stylistically it's a little more like some of those tapes and stuff that I would see at the library when I was a kid. And but it's very much based on my memory of it. If you actually watch them, they look way worse. Like, it does not look good. But it was a lot of me trying to get that feeling back. And so the soundtrack sort of has that. I tried to make sure that the sound effects that we used felt a little older at times. And yeah, so even like there was a wind effect that we used in the desert outside of the train, where, you know, normally you just use like a wind sound effect, but I was like, no, I want to feel like it, like I remember those wind sound effects sounding, which would be like a synthesizer that go, which is not a real wind effect, but for some reason it evokes the sound of wind, you know? Right. So that sort of thing I would get really into as well, trying to evoke that old feeling.
And that's what we're trying to evoke here, and we do every week on Everything Old is New Again. We'll be back with the creator of Infinity Train, Owen Dennis, right after this. Everything Old is New Again.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Infinity Train, Book 2, coming soon.
Remember, you can't spell escape without companionship. Companionship? Companionscape.
Welcome back to Everything Old is New Again. You can't spell exciting, thrilling, fun, different entertainment such as Infinity Train without our guest. And the gentleman is Owen Dennis. We're having a terrific time so far. Also joined by my kids, Leo and Angelica. And I think, Angelica, you may have a question to start us off here. That'll be very interesting. Let's see what you have to say. Sure, it will be next, Leo. How about that? Angelica, go ahead.
So which season do you feel most connected to, and why? And was this season your favorite to make?
Well, that's a very difficult question, because I feel very connected to all of the seasons, because each of them is such a different feeling and mood. And when we wrote it, we're feeling very specific things while we were making it. So, you know, season 1 is very important to me because it's not only the first season, but it's the first show, the first TV show I ever made that was mine, you know, which is a very interesting feeling. It's very strange. But they're all very near and dear to my heart, because we got to cover such different themes and ideas in each one. And when you watch them, it feels that way. Like, season 1 feels very different than season 2, which feels very different than season 3, which feels very different than season 4. They're all extremely different from one another, and that's something that has always been attractive to me. I really like it. Like, the show is kind of built in a way that would keep my attention, because I don't like doing the same characters and the same stories over and over and over and over and over again. So instead, it's like, okay, every episode it's a new train car, and every season it's a new main character, and it's just constant new, which is something I need to keep my attention.
And of course, as a listener or watcher, observer, the possibilities, of course, are endless on Infinity Train. Leo, we have a question. Let's hear.
In season 1, why did you make Tulip like onions so much?
I like onions. I just thought it'd be something kind of weird. I feel, if you think about people, every person has a thing to them that's sort of like strange, a little strange, because we all have our sort of small little quirks and things like that make us very unique and odd and different. And so that's sort of why I wanted to do that. She likes raw onions, and she likes programming, and that's what she's into. And I'm sure she has terrible breath, but that's how people are.
Isn't that funny, Leo? It's great. Listen, I know you're a fan, and we're influenced a little bit by some shows that we've loved as well, like The Never-Ending Story and Star Trek Voyager, and I just think it's sort of parallel here with Angelica and Leo getting, and myself, of course, we're getting to meet you, a person that we admire from afar, and I'm wondering how it was like, or what it was like to have yourself cast Kate Mulgrew as the cat, a recurring character in the show. I'm assuming, just from what I'm reading, that you were a fan of hers, or at least had some inclination. You knew who she was, certainly. So here we go.
Yeah. We were big fans of Star Trek Voyager. Actually, Maddie and I, Madeline Careypell, who was my supervising producer, she and I were both really into Star Trek Voyager, and actually one of the first writers that we hired onto the show when we were viewing her. We were like, oh, what are you into? She's like, oh, I like Star Trek. And Maddie and I were like, oh yeah, which Star Trek do you like the most? And she was like, Voyager. And we were like, yeah. It was very, it's odd working with people that you're, with actors and with artists and writers who you admire, because you admire them and you view them in a certain sort of column, where it's like a sort of an unattainable person that you don't know, and they're like famous and you're not with them. But once you actually get into the room and start working with them, and it just becomes like a very normal interaction between two creative people. Or, when it's a voice acting thing, it's, 4 or 5 creative people.
Right, exactly.
So it's pretty interesting. And Kate Mulgrew is very, very cool. There's a reason she was cast as a starship captain, and it's because she's like, she knows what she's doing and she gets in there and does it.
Exactly. Very professional. We've had quite a number of Star Trek actors on the show. We do a Star Trek reference every show, so there's our Star Trek reference for this show. And Angelica, you have another question? Feel free.
So in each season, there's like an animal companion or like some sort of companion to the main character. So I wanted to know which companion is your favorite and why.
That's another one that's like, picking favorites is very hard because they're all so different. I really like Atticus. He was the first one, and also he was based on the corgi that I had growing up. Every corgi that I've ever met is very proud. I have a corgi, and she's extremely prideful. And they all think they're much bigger and stronger and more powerful than they are, which is very funny. But yeah, I like all of them in very different ways. Alan Dracula is very funny to me. Alan Dracula is a deer that can do anything. Alan Dracula has the powers of a god, basically, but he's a deer, so he doesn't really have the intelligence or desires of a god. So it's just sort of like he just does whatever he wants whenever he needs to. The animal companion thing is very interesting because we figured out that there was sort of a structure to each of our seasons, which is that there's a denizen, a mystery of some kind, or what do we call it? We said each season has a passenger, a denizen, and an anomaly. That's what it was. So like each season, if you go through it, you go like, oh yeah, there's the passenger, and there's the denizen or companion, and then there's something odd about what's happening. And that's something we try to keep as a structure for every season.
How about that? And speaking about companions, it just rings a bell for me, and I know you were a Doctor Who fan way back when, growing up. And we've gone to all the Doctor Who, Long Island Doctor Who conventions, and had the pleasure of having many of them as a guest, Paul McGann and Sylvester McCoy, who were doctors. Cool. And we've had Daphne Ashbrook and Wendy Padbury, who's with companions, and John Lessons, the K9, the dog. And so I ask you, did that in some way, because you have to tell a story and you have to work off of people, it can't be one person, but the fact that you've got a companion in every episode too, is there some parallel there to your love of Doctor Who?
Oh, absolutely. That was definitely an influence. I mean, with Doctor Who, that's also one where I think about how like that was a big like mystery thing in my life when I was a kid. So my parents, when I was very young or something, I think it was maybe even before I was born, Doctor Who would be aired on TV, and my parents used to watch it together. But then for a little while, my dad had to go work in another part of the country, so they would miss watching it together. So what they would do is one person would record it on tape and then label it on the tape with DRWHO, and then they'd get back and they'd watch it together. Well, as a kid, I was like, oh, I like Doctor Who, and so I would just take whatever tape it was and put it in and watch it, which meant that I was getting these random episodes of Doctor Who that took place throughout like 79 through 92 or something like that. And so it had like reruns and all this sort of stuff. And it was just this weird thing. It was like the first thing I knew how to read, because I was like, oh, I like the thing that looks like DRWHO. I like that. And so I'd put that into the tape, into the VCR and play it. And it would end up, you know, I had like favorite companions and favorite like doctors and things like that. But I didn't know how to, I didn't know how to be like, well, this storyline happened here and here and here. Like I couldn't do that. So it was all these like random episodes and random pieces that I just sort of had to put together in my brain and go like, well, I hope that's what the story is. I don't know.
Sort of like putting a jigsaw puzzle together in a way, especially different doctors and so forth as you go, right?
Yeah. So I have particular storylines of Doctor Who that I'm like, yeah, that's a good storyline, but I realize that's only because it just happened to be a storyline where I got the whole storyline.
Joe?
Who was the hardest character to create on the show and why?
Creation of a character is always difficult. I would say the ones that took the most delicacy, I would say, were Grace and Simon. There's a lot of stuff going on between Grace and Simon and the greater story of the world, and like what the subtextual things are going on with their feelings towards each other or towards the train or towards all this sort of stuff. That one took the most, like, let's make sure this line is exactly right. Let's make sure this feeling is exactly right. That one was really, really important because it was so difficult to because, you know, by the end of it, you know, spoiler alert, and I guess I won't do spoilers, but by the end, things don't end in a way that feels good, which was intentional, but they also don't feel bad, which was intentional. We specifically wanted to like thread this needle where by the end of that season, you feel like, well, that happened. And that's about it.
But also, what's next, though? I mean, there's always that question. You want to let's resolve that a little bit more.
It's a constant balancing act. That one I would say was one of the harder ones.
That's very interesting. Now, we'll be back right after this on Everything Old is New again to dive into more and to find out what exactly does John Carpenter from Halloween have to do with this animated fantastic show called Infinity Train. If you're not watching, you got to get on board with HBO Max. We'll be back right after this on Everything Old's New again.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything Old is New Again, with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Simon, take a look at this.
Yours should be glowing.
We need to get her to the apex right away.
The train can be confusing and lonely.
Kids have been disappearing when their numbers go down.
I know. I'm looking for passengers to help. You could come back with us.
Isn't that interesting? These are rather interesting clips that if you're not a fan or know the show yet, you're questioning what's going on. We're talking to Owen Dennis, who is the creator of Infinity Train. That's on HBO Max, 4 seasons worth. That we'll talk about this, but I'll tell you, it's not just for kids anymore, so to speak. Animation's not just for kids. Well, let's just dive into that. I did tease a little bit about John Carpenter, so maybe we'll do two birds with one stone here. John Carpenter was a director, of course, for us that know and remember how the original Halloween, the Thing remake back in the 80s, and the man is, to me, a genius, and took off after maybe Hitchcock, something like that, where he's a gentleman that leaves some things to the imagination when he presents his work and is effective in that regard. And I know that Owen Dennis has got some, I shouldn't be like that where I know, but I've just researched and heard you say that that you have some influence with John Carpenter. I should say he has some influence on your writing team and how you've kind of structured, if you will, some of the scenes and some of the creation of Infinity Train. So maybe you can explore that a little better than I can.
Well, I actually there's a packet that I would give out to all the storyboarders on the show where it says like, hey, this is how we like to draw the show, this is how we like to do emotions, this is how we like to do this and that. But then the last page where it's like, if you don't know what to do, just WWJCD. What would John Carpenter do?
There you go.
And so that was kind of like a big thing for me. The music in the show is very heavily John Carpenter-esque. It's all synthesizers, and we actually used a lot in the way of entirely. We used analog synthesizers for the whole thing, so it's not even like weird like digital versions of analog. It's like a microphone hookup to an analog synthesizer. Many of the synthesizers were from the late 80s and things like that, which was pretty cool. And I just generally think of like the way John Carpenter works is he takes a big idea and then he tends to try and make it a very personal story about one person experiencing whatever this big idea is. And he films all of his stuff from the perspective of that person or that small group of people, like whatever. He keeps things small, even though whatever's happening is a very big thing, which is very much how I think some of the best storytelling is done. And we try to do that on our show. So we have this gigantic, infinite train with all these different worlds and stuff. And you can imagine how you'd have like, oh, then there's like this big war between the train cars, and like and you can do like all this stuff or whatever. But like, I'm not attracted to that. I'm much more attracted to one person or a couple of people stuck in this gigantic situation that they have very little control over and having to figure out how they deal with it, which is something that happens a lot in John Carpenter films.
It's sort of the power of the individual, number one. Number two, also, you can relate to it more when you're talking to and representing one person as opposed to trying to represent, the entire cornucopia at once,
I mean, that's how we experience life.
Right.
We don't experience life from a helicopter perspective looking at masses of armies clashing.
Right.
We experience life from the perspective of a person. I'm just right here, and this is where I am. That's how we experience everything.
Right, and you're doing what you can within your circle, so to speak.
Exactly.
And how does that affect the world? It's a different story and great storytelling. Angelica, what do you got?
What is your target audience for the show? Kids, adults, or both?
I believe that there's no such thing as a target audience. I think that if you make something, the people who like it will find it. In the corporate sense of the word target audience, I would say it's for everybody. There is certainly debate about whether this show is for kids or not, but I believe it is. A lot of people say the show is too scary for kids, and I disagree. I think that, when I was a kid, I watched Indiana Jones, right? When I was like 5-6 years old. Okay, well, at the end of Indiana Jones, a man's face melts off. Yeah. And another man's head explodes. And it's like, but people seem to have this idea like, well, no, but that's okay because that's grandfathered in. We saw that when we were kids, so it's okay to show kids now. And it's like, that's not how it works. Like, if you're a small child, I mean, that was supposed to look realistic,
Right.
That was supposed to be real. So I don't think that there's really much of a difference between what's meant for kids and what's meant for adults, except maybe, less sex and violence a little bit.
Right.
But that's about it. I think something else that I've talked about a lot is that I view it as like, oh, it's too scary for kids. I don't think so. The thing is, like, I think giving horror to children is a great idea because one, I like scaring children. Two, I think about how, kids watching TV, you're watching TV or a movie or something, and what you're doing is you're experiencing emotions that are happening. You're watching a story and you're experiencing emotions. Well, experiencing fear while watching a television show or a movie is actually the safest way you could possibly experience fear, right? So like, what would you rather have happen? Would you rather experience fear for the first time in a safe environment where it's just on TV and nothing is actually bad is happening? Or would you rather experience fear for the first time in real life where
Right.
something bad is actually happening?
Exactly.
So really what it does is it lets you figure out, like, how do I react to this situation? How do I deal with this situation in a safe environment?
Well, I was going to say, and also children, are sometimes exposed to horrifying situations at home and so forth. It's not like this doesn't exist. And let me just ask for kicks, Angelica and Leo, are you frightened by Infinity Train? And even if you were, did it turn you off to the show? Put it that way.
No.
Well, you were frightened by. Were you frightened by it first? I guess I say.
Not like. Yes and no. Like, the concept is scary, but I wasn't like scared that I was like, I'm gonna like stop watching this now because I like.
Well, that something bad's gonna happen to you. Or something,
no, never like that. Yeah. No.
So and certainly it didn't stop either of you from watching. It's the exact opposite. No. So that's very interesting. So the point is also that when you have a show like this and there's more to it than like we talk about, the Bugs Bunny, and that's fine, but there's more to it. There are life lessons in this, I think, in this presentation. Are you, it seems like, but let's just go there, are you trying to in some way do, maybe morality play is not the right word, but in some ways expose whoever's watching to theories and themes and making them think about themselves and maybe think about life in general or certain topics that you're trying to explore?
Absolutely. I mean, something that I want people to experience when they're watching this is to experience the idea of like, everybody has something that's happening to them. Everybody. And some people watch the show and they're like, oh, this exact thing has happened to me. A lot of people that I know have related to Tulip a lot because her parents are going through a divorce. It's a big deal. I personally, my parents did not get divorced, but I knew a lot of kids when I was a kid whose parents were getting divorced, and a couple of our writers had parents who were getting divorced, who were divorced. And so that's an experience that people experience. And even if it's something that you might personally not have experienced, other people around you are. And it can sort of let you know what they're feeling and thinking, and what's going on with them. And also, if you are someone who's experienced that, it lets you know that you're not alone in that experience.
Exactly. Joe?
Do you have any advice for anyone who wants to get into the fields of animation and storytelling?
Yeah. Just do it all the time. That's it. It's the common thing that any artist is going to tell you is going to be like, work all the time, constantly draw, constantly be telling stories. And I agree with that to an extent. You have to keep drawing, keep telling stories. You get practice, show it to other people. Don't be afraid of whatever advice they give. When they say to try something, just try it, even though it might not be what you originally are into or you like. Try it out anyway, because there's always something you can learn even from stuff you don't like. At the same time, a big piece of advice that I always give is to not do any of those things and instead go do something completely different that has nothing to do with art, that has nothing to do with drawing or writing or storytelling or anything. Because if you need to go out and like experience the world and meet people and do things, because otherwise, if you don't, you're not going to have any stories to tell.
Does that make sense? Yeah. Exactly. I did stand-up comedy in the and I was 17 years old. Guess what? It was difficult because I didn't have a lot of life experience. So
it's an issue.
How could you be an artist?
I've seen a lot of comics where like I've seen some artists where like their work is beautiful, but then I see like their comics, and their comic starts with them sitting at a computer drawing a comic. And I'm like, I don't care about that.
Right.
I don't want to see that. I want to see someone experiencing something.
Exactly.
And sitting at a computer and drawing a comic is not cutting experience.
It. Although what is cutting it is sitting at the radio listening to our special guest Owen Dennis here on Everything Old is New Again, talking about Infinity Train. We'll be back for our last section right after this on Everything Old is New Again.
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
This is the train?
Wow! This is so cool!
Welcome back to Everything Old is New Again. It is cool. It's an amazing, amazing show for, to me, adults and children during this time when we've got some difficult things going on with the pandemic, etc., to dive into new entertainment, something that is family-oriented, I would suggest to you, but also is a mystery, also is real creative, really something different. Also, if you're fans of Ghostbusters, first season you got Ernie Hudson, or you've got Kate McGrew, all throughout. It's just so much to Infinity Train, so much for so many people, and we're joined here on Everything Old is New Again with and by Owen Dennis, and we're just having a terrific time exploring this show that if you haven't seen it, dive into it on HBO Max. If you have, now after this interview, maybe you can review it again with a different eye, a different understanding of what's going on behind the scenes, so to speak. And Leo Viviani is joining us here. 9-year-old is really a fan of this show. And Leo, I think you may have a question. What do you have for us here?
If you were to count, how many wheels would be on the Infinity Train?
It would be infinity times 10.
There you go.
Because there's 10 wheels on each train car.
There you go. Good question, Leo. Angelica, you have a question or two? Let's hear what you have to say.
So there are in the show a lot of relatable characters. I was wondering which character in the show maybe is like most relatable to you and why?
I would say there's a lot. I relate to all of them in various degrees, otherwise we wouldn't be able to write them. But I would say I very much relate to Tulip, and I very much relate to Mingy and Ryan. Like it's tough. Tulip though, she's from a similar part of Minnesota where I grew up. So there's a lot of references, especially in that first episode, to Minnesota and the place where I grew up, which is I was very specific in wanting her to be from there because I don't really see a lot of cartoons that talk about that sort of area. You know, it's usually if I see something where it's about like, oh, it's people who live in the country, it's always like, you know, uneducated stereotypes of like country bumpkin people, when it's like that's not really how it is. Yes, there are those people out there, but also those people are in the city and like they're all over the place. So it was important to me to make sure that I showed a rural place that was similar to what I experienced as a kid.
And I think we've talked to many people, and producers of shows and so forth, and creators and writers, and I think writing about something you're familiar with and know about is certainly a common theme. And I think that's terrific to be able to bring in that perspective into an animated feature. And I just think it resonates from what I see to all, but it resonates to kids in that Angelica, for example, in school during recess, it's a different world now. They're able to bring out their phone, and what do? There's a group of 7 or 8 of you that are reviewing and watching and exploring Infinity Train right then and there after lunch, right?
Yeah, recess.
At recess. So
that's cool.
Just to give you a little feedback, it must be rewarding to be able to hear that what you're putting so much time, effort, and yourself into does kind of come back to you.
Yeah, it is really nice. It's an odd experience making television because you make it and then it just goes out there and then that's it. And the only reactions you ever get to hear are people talking on Twitter or Instagram or something like that, which, are mostly adults. So you don't really get to hear things from kids or anything. And then also it's unlike, movies where if I made a movie and I went out to a theater, I could hear a crowd go like ha 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 or aw or like whatever. I could hear that. But when something just releases onto a TV, you don't get to experience it. So you have this big release of like, ta-da, we made it, it's done. And then you just sit there quietly and do nothing. It's kind of it.
Right. Did that tree just fall in the forest? Did anybody hear it? What happened?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's nice. It's nice when I can see people's reactions and hear what they're thinking and feeling. It's very nice.
And for everyone listening in, I mean, this show and this interview is inspired by Angelica and Leo, who went through this tough time in the pandemic, and this show was one of the many, I should say few shows, but the many episodes that got them through these times, because it's engaging. It's again, Bugs Bunny's cool and fun and everything, but this has more to it. This has themes, this has messages, this has ideas that I don't know that children on their own are necessarily thinking about and putting together, or at least ignites a fire, I think, under the youth. Angelica, yes or no?
Yes.
And you have another question. That's what you're dying. Okay, go ahead. Get to another question. Feel free.
Okay, so what makes you proud of the work you, the crew, and the cast put into Infinity Train?
What makes me proud of it?
Yes.
I think it's just I find that at that moment at the end where we're finished, I really like that feeling, and I just feel proud of it in general because it feels like we're doing things that I don't really see a lot of on TV or in streaming, especially in animation. Animation, there's this sort of the stereotype that animation and cartoons are either for children, like little babies, or they're for adults, like 18 and older. And it feels like there's this sort of missing. And if people try to like go like, oh, this is for everybody, then it's always about like a family or something like that. And it feels like there's this big missing chunk of people that are like aged 9 to 17, like in there, like there's other stuff, at least in Western animation. I think anime and animation that comes out of Japan, they cover that sort of stuff, that age range all the time, but it's very hard to find Western cartoons that do that. So I feel like ours does that. And that's something that makes me happy that we're able to get into that niche,
which is such a great point. Niche. It is such a great point because that age, do have almost, not to say, but as many as, let's say, issues as any other age, and why not dive into those issues?
I always feel like every time someone tries to do some sort of teen-oriented show or in there somewhere, it's always. It's almost like somebody's trying to pretend to be a teenager and talk like a teenager instead of, say, just talking to somebody about what they're experiencing. Right. Like it's like there's a difference between trying to adopt the language of somebody younger than you versus just talking with somebody who's younger than you.
Teenagers,
I feel like
and younger people are just people. Like what was it? One grandma used to say, right? They're kids of people too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Joe, you had one more question before we go.
So one of the names for the seasons is like they call it like books. I was wondering, is there any like story behind why they're called like books 1, 2, 3, and 4?
Yeah, the story is I didn't decide that. that was the marketing people. They decided that. I think it was something that was sort of viewed as like the feeling, the tone of the show is that it feels sort of like a YA novel a little bit. So I think that's what they're sort of going for, is that like it feels sort of like these older storybooks and stuff like that. So they wanted just to call them books, which, whatever, I'm fine with it. But it wasn't what I was calling it originally. So it made things a little confusing, but it's fine. I mean, they're all called books, but they also all have their own subtitles. So the first season is called The Perennial Child. The second season is called Cracked Reflection. The third season is called Cult of the Conductor. And then the fourth season is called Duet. So they all have their like names to go with each of these seasons as well.
There we go, and I'll throw out a big question, and only sort of a minute left to go here, but I'll throw it. There's the idea that the show seems to have one commonality, is the story of redemption of people and how people can change and learn lessons in life no matter where they are, and obviously you intended to do that. Are you proud, happy the way it turned out? You were able to tell that kind of the story the way you wanted to?
Yeah, I feel like what's common is that people go like, oh, it's a show about redemption and stuff, so everybody's going to get redeemed. But, we find out, no, not everybody does. There's choices. You have to make choices to do the things to get better and sort of things like that. So that was something that was also very important to me, is to show that there are consequences to your choices, and the choices are there and you can make them. It's up to you.
But you still have to do the work.
You still have to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I love about the realism of it, is that not everybody is redeemed. We don't do any spoilers, but maybe or maybe not everybody gets off the train. Maybe not everybody lives. But we'll talk about those things as you investigate Infinity Train in the future. Hopefully, as a result of listening to our show, Everything Old is New Again with Owen Dennis. 30 seconds left. We're sad to see you go, but so happy to have had the opportunity to spend some time with you, to look behind the scenes. This is going to spread like wildfire from the ages of 9 to 17, at least we know that, and more. But it really is an exciting, wonderful show. And if you're not tuning into it, Infinity Train is the name of it. Angelica, you have anything else to say on the way out? Goodbye and so forth.
Just thank you for making the show in general. It's a big part of like my life, and I really, really enjoy that I got to like experience it. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. No problem. Happy to help.
There you go. Leo, anything on the way out, Leo? You could just say goodbye if you feel like it.
Bye.
There we go.
Bye.
All right, again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me on the show.
My pleasure. Well, thanks for coming on board our Infinity Train, if you will, because we're going on and on and on. But the bottom line is Infinity Train, HBO Max. It's on now. Get involved. Thank you, Owen Dennis. We'll be back next week. Everything old is new again.
Thank you.